Welcome to the channel, guys. We are back again, and today I'm going to be doing a first impression for Fiero and Ivory Root by Xerjoff, so stay tuned for that. If you like the content, hit that like and subscribe button. Really do appreciate it. A while back, Xerjoff had a deal where you could buy Italica online, and I did buy Italica. I also got a sample set that came with it. Now, I've done a first impression for Neo and Golden Dala. Might do a full review in the future, but I still haven't tried these other two, which I've heard actually good things about. So I'm going to do a first impression of these, and I'm going to try and make this a Friday series, First Impression Fridays, because, well, people seem to like these first impressions, and I also enjoy doing them. So that sounds good to me, and let's get into it. Let's start with Fiero. I think this is a fresher fragrance, if I recall, from what I heard of it. And so good for the weather, and that's why I'm going to start with this one. Okay, that does open very nicely. It's very fresh. There's a little bit of tartness in there. Definitely getting a lot of citrus elements in the opening as well. Quite strong. Reminds me a little bit of orange and a little bit of like an orange candy or something like that, which is actually quite an interesting accord. But it's definitely very refreshing, clean smelling as well. As I said, the citruses are quite prominent too, and it does have a nice sort of candy-ish vibe to it. It doesn't come off so much like orange anymore, but it does have a nice candy kind of a vibe, almost like a Lifesavers or something like that, so it is actually very interesting. I'm going to return to this one in a bit, but I'm going to move on to Ivory Root. Let this one sit for a little bit, see what it smells like after a few moments, let it dry down a little bit, see if it develops or changes. Actually, from memory, one of the fragrances that I think has the biggest change from the opening to the dry down is also a Xerjoff Amalfi Coast. Very interesting fragrance if you do get the chance to try it out. Opens up with this really nice ice cream vibe and very almost rapidly transitions into a completely different fragrance that is unrecognizable in the first from the opening. So very nice and interesting when fragrances do that. But let's move on to Ivory Root. This is a spicy fragrance from what I heard, which is something that attracted me to it. Sounding like it would be a very, very good fall winter fragrance. So hoping that as well. Let's see what we got. Okay, that's interesting. Smooth. I get a very clear kind of sweetness. Reminds me a lot of vanilla. Spice is not as upfront as I would have thought, at least on the initial opening, but I do get some kind of a spice vibe to this one. Spices are definitely starting to come a little bit more to the forefront. A lot more prominent now. Okay, so it's getting spicier as it's going. I can't really pick out a particular spice, but actually what this kind of reminds me of is, I believe it's called Egyptian King by Alexandria. And it has this sort of creamy, spicy vibe that really does remind me of like the Middle East or something like that. It kind of gives off that impression of like an ancient civilization with all the spices, and I think this is supposed to represent something like the old spice roots, all the kinds of things that they would trade on those roots. And it definitely has a similar vibe to it as the Alexandria, although I do believe that this one came first. But creamy, spicy, and interesting. Yeah, so this one has a lot of depth to it, a lot of character. I do think it smells classy. There is that sort of regal quality, as I mentioned a little bit ago with it. Interesting. And I will say, if this one performs anything like Egyptian King, that was a surprise compliment getter for me. So this one might do the same. Very kind of similar in composition as Egyptian King. I'm gonna go back to Fiero, see what is up with it now. So there is something of slight greenness in there now, and it's definitely becoming a lot more punchy. So that sort of zesty vibe that I had is definitely a little bit more punchy. I do get a little hint of a greenness there. And again, yeah, that sort of Lifesavers accord that I guess I want to call it is more prominent. I do actually really like that. So it has this sort of sweet candied, a little bit slightly fruit fresh vibe. I think this one would be very easy to wear, and I think it would be a nice one for the summer too. It's always nice when they manage to find a fragrance that's still sweet, but can be worn in the summer. I know a lot of fragrances, they become a little too cloying, especially in the high heat, but this one has a little bit of freshness to it. A little bit of that fruity, candied, Lifesaver vibe. Do like this one. And it does smell fairly unique, so I can't think of a fragrance off the top of my head that really gives me the impression of this fragrance. Ivory Root definitely, though, just going back to Ivory Root, it still does have that kind of Egyptian King vibe, again, which is not a bad thing. It's actually a nice fragrance. It's definitely got this very thick creaminess that I think is something that would play really well in the fall. Definitely in the winter. It is definitely the stronger of the two as well. I'm getting more whiffs of the Ivory Root than I am of Fiero. And the spices are almost fresh, I want to actually say. It's not a fresh fragrance per se. It's, as I said, a very creamy, thick fragrance. But the spices are not quite as punchy as something like the opening of Spice Bomb Extreme. It does have a nice, smooth spiciness, which really does work with the creaminess very well. So if you think about, or if you're looking for something that's creamy, has a definitely more of an oriental spicy. It's not like a black pepper kind of a spice. It's more of a spice cupboard. And again, something with this one as well, with the spices, with the creaminess, gives me this impression of kind of a sandy kind of a texture, which I do actually enjoy very much. So I think this is a good one. Definitely, I understand why this one is rated so highly. Not quite what I was expecting from the fragrance, but that's actually kind of a good thing. Having talked to some people about this one, I was expecting something more like Amber Nuit, I believe it is, by Dior, and I don't really like that fragrance. I know a lot of people love it. Not a big fan of it, but this one is definitely more interesting, more wearable to me. Yeah, Fiero, very good for the summer. I actually do think I like Fiero a little bit more. I know this one's not talked about as much by the house, but it has a nice, crisp freshness. That Lifesavers candy vibe, and there is definitely a persistent slight greenness there, which adds a nice dimension. So it is what I think to be a fairly unique, high quality, fresh fragrance. Something that's good for the summer, something that's good for the spring. I think this could easily be worn casually or formally, irrespective of the occasion. Ivory Root, on the other hand, more or less the contrast of that, so good for fall, winter. It's a thicker fragrance. It's very creamy. It is definitely luxurious. And I think it's something that would be more well suited for a formal occasion than casually. I mean, you could, of course, wear this casually, but this definitely would play well for a formal situation. Very thick, very strong, very luxurious. So both these fragrances, Fiero and Ivory Root, happy to say that I'm not disappointed. So far, I've liked a lot of stuff from Xerjoff, and it was nice to sample all of these fragrances as well. And I'm definitely hoping to try out some more from the house. I think these two, especially Ivory Root, since we are moving towards winter, going to be giving this one some more tries and see what the full performance is like. Anyways, guys, that's it for this one. Have you tried anything from Xerjoff? Have you tried Fiero? Or have you tried Ivory Root? Let me know in a comment down below. Let me know if there's something else from Xerjoff you think I should try out. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.